Welcome back, dear dreamer, to Sleepy Science History. I hope you're tucked in, cozy beneath your blankets, letting the day slowly fade away. Tonight, we'll drift together into a question both strange and soothing. What would happen if Earth stopped spinning? Imagine it. Oceans pausing mid-dance, skies frozen in place, a world divided between endless day and eternal night. It sounds frightening, but don't worry. We'll explore it gently, like tracing constellations in the quiet of midnight. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let curiosity carry you. Stay with me until the end, and you might just fall asleep with wonder. Have you ever lain on your back, late at night, staring up at the sky, and wondered, what exactly is this planet doing right now beneath me? You and I both know that Earth spins, though we rarely feel it. Isn't that strange? We are carried along at over 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator, faster than the speed of sound, and yet, it feels as if we are sitting perfectly still. Why is that? How can something so fast feel so calm? I often think of it like sitting on a smooth train. If the ride is steady, you barely notice the movement. You sip your tea, read your book, maybe close your eyes and drift. But the train is flying across the countryside, wheels humming, air rushing by. The motion is real, but it disappears into comfort. Could it be that Earth is like that train? A cosmic carriage, carrying all of us together, so steady that the speed vanishes from our senses? And then, a mischievous question tiptoes in. What if the train stopped? Not gently, not with brakes squealing and slowing, but suddenly jolting, snapping, shuddering to a halt. What would happen to you inside that train? What would happen to your teacup? To the book in your hands? To your own body? Now, let's lift that thought higher onto the scale of planets. What would happen if Earth itself suddenly stopped spinning? Can you picture it? The familiar globe, with its green and blue and swirling clouds, frozen mid-turn like a child's toy globe stuck on its axis. Would the oceans remain calm, their waves lapping gently as always? Or would they rush wildly, slamming into continents like spilled water in a pan? Would mountains tremble? Would cities crumble? It's a frightening thought, isn't it? But also strangely captivating. I invite you, as we wander together through this question, not to rush toward doom, but to linger gently with the possibilities. We'll move slowly, step by step, as if walking through a dreamscape. There will be facts, yes, but also little pauses, reflections, maybe even a smile or two at the oddness of it all. Because isn't it odd to imagine our entire world at a standstill? Let's begin with you, with us. Right now, as you sit, you are moving eastward with the Earth's spin. Depending on where you live, you might be gliding at hundreds of kilometers per hour, or even more than 1,000. You don't feel it because everything around you, your house, your chair, even the air, moves with you. But if the Earth suddenly stopped, what would happen to you? Would you be thrown forward like a passenger in that train without a seatbelt? The answer is yes. You, me, every tree, every car, every droplet of water in every ocean would keep moving at the original speed. That means entire oceans would surge forward. Winds would roar at speeds unimaginable. Buildings, mountainsides, forests, nothing would resist that kind of inertia. Does that picture send a shiver down your spine? Or does it make you tilt your head, imagining a world in motion even when the planet itself is still? Now, maybe you're wondering, could we survive such an event? The honest truth is that if Earth stopped suddenly, survival would be almost impossible. The devastation would be instant and global. But here's the gentle twist. It's unlikely to happen in reality. Physics doesn't work that way. Planets don't slam on the brakes. They change slowly, gradually, over billions of years. So perhaps the better question is, what if Earth's spin slowed, little by little, over time? Would the days grow longer? Would you wake up one morning to find the sun lingering in the sky just a bit too long? Imagine a day stretching out not to 24 hours but to 30, then 40, then perhaps hundreds of hours. The rhythm of our lives would change. Our calendars would shift. We might live in weeks that feel like months. Would we adjust? Would we nap more often under long twilights? Would farmers grow strange new crops that thrive under endless sunlight? And what about the oceans? If the Earth slowed gradually, the waters would creep toward the poles, drawn by gravity's reshaped balance. The equator, once swollen with oceans pushed outward by spin, would dry, becoming belts of desert, while the poles, those icy realms, might swell with water, perhaps lush with strange new life. Can you see it? A map of the world, unrecognizable, with seas in new places and lands exposed where waves once roared. But if Earth stopped completely, if one side always faced the sun, and the other sat in endless night, what then? Would one half of the world be scorched into desert, while the other froze into darkness? And in between, at the edges, might there be a twilight zone, a narrow band where life clings on, basking in a permanent sunrise or sunset? Could humanity huddle there, in the strip between fire and ice, growing used to a sun that never rises, never sets, only hangs eternal on the horizon? Isn't it haunting to think of a sky where dawn never comes, or a landscape where stars never fade? Would you prefer to live in the frozen dark, under constellations that never move, or in the blazing light, where shadows never lengthen? Which feels more like home to you, eternal day or eternal night? I wonder, too, about time itself. We measure our hours, our months, our years by Earth's spin and orbit. But if the spin vanished, would time feel different? Would you count the passing of life in heartbeats instead of hours? In meals cooked, in stories told, in candles burned? Maybe clocks would become relics, their hands circling uselessly. Maybe we would invent new rhythms, singing songs not of morning or evening, but of warmth and cold, of light and shadow. Wouldn't that be a strange, poetic way to live? And what of animals? Would birds still migrate, if there were no dawn to guide them? Would flowers bloom forever in the sun, or would they wither under its gaze? Would nocturnal creatures fade into legend, their nights stolen away? Or, perhaps some new forms of life would emerge, perfectly adapted to a motionless Earth. Creatures that thrive in blazing heat, sipping light like nectar. Others that burrow deep into ice, glowing faintly in eternal night. Could we even imagine such beings? Sometimes, when I ask these questions, I realize they are less about answers and more about wonder. The Earth will likely never stop spinning, but to picture it is to stretch the mind, to feel the fragility of our home, and to sense how dependent we are on rhythms we never notice. Isn't it humbling to think that the quiet turning of our planet is the metronome for everything we know, our sleep, our seasons, even the beating of our civilizations? So, perhaps, the real gift of this question is not in the catastrophe it suggests, but in the appreciation it awakens. Tonight, when you look up at the stars, you might think about how fast you're moving. You might picture yourself carried gently eastward, faster than a jet, wrapped safely in Earth's embrace. And you might whisper a quiet thank you, to gravity, to physics, to the invisible spin that makes our days and nights. And as you close your eyes, ask yourself one last question. If the Earth did stop, would we mourn what we lost, or would we discover new ways to live, new stories to tell, new rhythms to follow? Perhaps the answer lies not in fear, but in imagination. Do you ever wonder what it really means to live on a planet that spins? It's something we almost never think about. We take our mornings and nights for granted. The sunrise feels ordinary, the sunset inevitable, as though the universe owes us that rhythm. But is it ordinary? Or is it, perhaps, a quiet miracle happening every single day? I like to imagine Earth as a dancer. Can you see her? Draped in oceans and forests, twirling on her axis, spinning gracefully through space. Her movement is steady, dependable, almost hypnotic. And we, tiny creatures clinging to her surface, are spun along without effort. We don't stumble, we don't get dizzy. We simply live as though the dance is the air itself. But what if the dancer stopped mid-spin? Would she stumble? Would she collapse? Or would everything else, her oceans, her winds, her children, be the ones to fall? Let's wander together into this thought. Slowly, gently, like we're walking through a dream. Imagine you are standing at the equator, barefoot in the sand, feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin. You may not realize it, but at this exact moment, you are moving eastward faster than a jet plane. 1,600 kilometers per hour, faster than sound itself. And yet, the palm trees sway gently, the waves lap lazily at the shore, and you feel still. Isn't that strange? To be racing through space and yet feel as calm as if you were resting on a quiet porch. Now, what would happen if suddenly the earth stopped beneath you? Would you remain calm? Would your feet stay planted in the sand? Or would you, and the waves, and the trees, and the air itself all keep moving forward with the speed you never felt before? Yes, that is the secret. The earth may halt, but we would not. Inertia, the invisible law of motion, would insist that we continue. Like passengers flung from a train that stops too suddenly, we would all be hurled forward at breathtaking speeds. Doesn't that make you shiver? To imagine the ocean itself rising, surging, tumbling across continents as though it had been freed from its leash? And what of the mountains, the forests, the cities? Could they withstand such force? The truth, whispered quietly, is no. They would crumble, fracture, scatter. A sudden stop would unravel everything we know. But let's not rush into devastation. Instead, let's ask another question. Could Earth even stop like that? Could a planet slam on the brakes? The answer, thankfully, is no. Physics does not allow it. Planets are too massive, their motions too ancient, their dance too deeply woven into the fabric of space. They may slow, yes, over unimaginable spans of time, but never suddenly. Doesn't that thought comfort you even a little? To know that our world's dance is steady, reliable, not a fragile thread waiting to snap? And yet, the mind is curious. So let's imagine a different story. Not a sudden halt, but a gradual slowing. A gentle deceleration, like a dancer tiring after an endless performance. What would that world feel like? What would happen to us if our days lengthened, little by little, until they stretched into months or even years? Picture waking one morning to find the sun climbing the horizon just as usual. But as the day unfolds, it lingers. Noon comes late. Afternoon drags on. By evening, the sun seems reluctant to leave, hanging above the horizon like a guest who doesn't want to say goodbye. Would you notice? Would you glance at the clock and frown, wondering why time feels so strange? Or would you simply sink into the warmth, enjoying the endless light? As Earth slows, every day would become longer. Not just hours longer, but hundreds of hours longer. Imagine working a day shift that lasts a week. Imagine sleeping not by clocks, but by instinct, curling up in the middle of a sunlit afternoon because your body insists it's night. Would our lives adapt? Would we reinvent calendars, reshape societies, invent new words for time itself? And think of the plants. Flowers open their petals with the sunrise and close them at dusk. But what happens when dusk never arrives? Would they bloom endlessly, fragile from exhaustion? Or would some adapt, learning to rest even under the eternal gaze of the sun? Could forests, stretched under days that last months, grow larger, denser, stranger? What about animals? Would birds still migrate when seasons became unrecognizable? Would they lose their way, or would they discover new rhythms, new maps written in stars and winds instead of days and nights? And then, of course, there is the question of us. Humanity. We are creatures of habit. Our lives are built on the cycle of morning, afternoon, and night. Our cultures are carved into weeks, months, years. If that cycle unraveled, could we handle it? Would we create new rituals? Or would we cling stubbornly to old ones, counting hours, even when they no longer mean anything? Now, here is something wondrous to consider. If Earth slowed, our weather would change dramatically. The spin of our planet shapes winds and storms through something called the Coriolis effect. It's the reason hurricanes curl, the reason trade winds flow, the reason our climate dances as it does. Without the spin, storms would not spiral. Winds would shift. Weather itself would become unrecognizable. Can you imagine a sky without swirling storms? Without hurricanes? A sky where winds move in strange, alien patterns? Would we call it calmer? Or more dangerous? And the oceans? The oceans would be restless. Earth's spin pushes water outward at the equator, swelling it into a bulge. But if the spin slowed, that bulge would sink. The water would creep toward the poles, drowning coastlines we know today. Entire countries might vanish beneath new seas, while the equator dried into vast deserts. Could new civilizations rise in those dry lands, while old ones were lost beneath waves? Isn't it haunting to picture a world map utterly transformed, not by war or time, but by the slowing heartbeat of the planet itself? And then, if Earth stopped entirely, the changes would be greater still. One side would always face the sun, scorched into desert. The other would be cloaked in eternal night, frozen and silent. Between them would lie a twilight belt, a narrow band of permanent sunrise and sunset. Do you think we could survive there? Could cities bloom in the endless glow of dawn, where the temperature is gentle, neither burning nor freezing? Could humanity huddle in that strip, our whole species confined to a glowing edge between extremes? What would life look like in such a twilight world? Would farmers plant crops that grew under an eternal orange sky? Would children grow up never knowing the thrill of a sunrise or the peace of twilight, because both were all they ever saw? Would poets write songs of a sun that moves, passed down like fairy tales of an ancient world long gone? Sometimes I wonder, would we even call it day and night anymore? Or would those words become artifacts, fossils of language from a time when Earth still danced? Perhaps we would invent new words, lightlands and shadowlands, the warm side and the cold side. Maybe the very way we think about time and space would change, reshaped by the stillness of our planet. And yet, even in that strange world, life would persist. Life always finds a way. Maybe not the same flowers, the same birds, the same people, but something. New creatures, born to thrive in endless light or endless darkness. Perhaps plants that drink starlight. Animals that glow softly, carrying their own suns within them. Isn't it beautiful, in a way, to think that even in stillness, Earth would not be silent? So here we are, you and I, dreaming of impossible scenarios. But in doing so, aren't we also learning to appreciate the miracle we already live in? The steady spin, the rhythm of day and night, the gentle balance of climate and seasons, all of it woven by emotion we never feel. Maybe tonight, when you close your eyes, you'll think of the dancer spinning beneath you. You'll remember that you are carried, effortlessly, through space, part of a movement so vast and quiet that it vanishes into ordinary life. And maybe you'll whisper a quiet question to yourself. What if it stopped? Not because you expect an answer, but because the asking itself reminds you how precious the spin truly is. Have you ever thought about what keeps your feet so firmly on the ground? It seems like such a simple thing. You stand, you walk, you lie down at night, and the earth holds you in its embrace. Gravity, of course, that quiet force pulling you toward the center of the world. But is that all? Is it only gravity that keeps you rooted? Or is there something more subtle, something tied to Earth's spinning motion? Let me ask it another way. If Earth stopped spinning, would gravity feel the same? Would you still weigh what you weigh right now? Would your morning step onto the scale still greet you with the same stubborn number? Or would you suddenly feel heavier? It's a curious thought, isn't it? Let's explore it together, gently, as though we are tracing patterns in the sand. Right now, as the Earth spins, you are not just held by gravity. You are also carried outward by centrifugal force, the outward push you feel on a merry-go-round, or when a car takes a sharp curve and your body leans against the door. On Earth, that outward push is faint, gentle, almost hidden. But it is real. It pulls against gravity ever so slightly, especially at the equator where the spin is fastest. This means that you, right now, weigh a tiny bit less than you would if Earth were not spinning at all. Isn't that delightful? The spin of our planet is, in a sense, giving you a small gift of lightness every day. Not much, less than 1% of your weight, but enough that your body knows the difference, even if your mind does not. So if Earth stopped spinning, what would happen? You would feel heavier, not because gravity itself changed, but because that outward push vanished. Would you notice? Perhaps. Imagine carrying groceries up a hill and realizing it feels just a little harder than it used to. Imagine jumping and sensing you don't quite rise as high. Would you sigh in frustration? Or smile, realizing you are living in a world where the weight of life itself has subtly shifted? But let's not stop there. Think about the oceans. They, too, are lifted outward by Earth's spin, swelling at the equator like a skirt flaring as a dancer twirls. That bulge, held in place by centrifugal force, is over 40 meters high. 40 meters, taller than many buildings, yet spread invisibly across the planet's waste. If Earth stopped, that bulge would collapse. The water would begin to flow toward the poles, flooding coastlines there, draining equatorial lands. Entire regions would transform. Imagine deserts blooming where once there was sea, and islands vanishing beneath rising tides. Could you picture a map of Earth so drastically redrawn? And what about the air above us? It spins too, tied to the planet's motion. If Earth stopped suddenly, the atmosphere would keep rushing eastward at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. Winds of unimaginable force would roar across the surface. Could forests withstand such gales? Could cities remain standing? Likely not. But if Earth slowed gently, those winds would change more gradually, reshaping climate and weather. Would we learn to live under new skies, where jet streams vanished and storms behaved in alien ways? Now pause a moment and imagine yourself at the poles. Do you know that at Earth's north and south poles, the spin is barely noticeable? There, you are turning slowly in a circle once every 24 hours, but you're not flung outward. At the poles, you already weigh almost your true weight, unlightened by centrifugal force. So if Earth stopped, people at the poles might notice little change in their bodies. Isn't it curious, then, that the equator holds the greatest secrets of Earth's spin, while the poles sit quietly, unaffected by so much of its drama? Doesn't that make you wonder what life might be like if humans had evolved only at the poles? Would we even notice that Earth spun at all? Or would it seem like a still, quiet rock under the stars? And here's another question. If Earth stopped, not just for a moment, but forever, how would time itself feel? Right now, our 24-hour day is a marriage of spin and sunlight. The spinning planet pulls the sun across the sky. But in a motionless Earth, there would be no rising, no setting, only one face of the globe fixed under the eternal gaze of the sun. Would time itself collapse into something unrecognizable? Would we measure it only by seasons, summer, winter, or perhaps abandon the idea of time altogether? I sometimes wonder if clocks would become useless relics in such a world. Can you imagine holding one in your hand, its second hand ticking dutifully onward, while the sun outside never moves? Would you laugh at the absurdity? Or would you cling to the clock as a comfort, a reminder of the old world where days and nights once came and went? Now, consider this. If Earth stopped spinning, our magnetic field might change as well. Did you know that our planet's spin contributes to the swirling of molten iron deep within its core? That swirling creates the magnetic shield that protects us from the solar wind, from radiation that streams endlessly from the sun. If the spin faltered, would that shield weaken? Would the skies shimmer with auroras at every latitude, beautiful yet dangerous? Could humanity endure a planet bathed in radiation? Or would we retreat underground, hiding like moles in the dark? And then, of course, there is the matter of habit. Humans are creatures of routine. We rise with the sun, we sleep with the night. Our languages, our cultures, our very sense of meaning is tied to the cycle of day and night. Without that cycle, would we feel lost? Would we invent new stories, new rituals to replace what was gone? Perhaps we would create light festivals on the sunlit side and shadow feasts on the dark side, celebrating the extremes of existence. Doesn't it fascinate you to think of cultures born not from hours and calendars, but from the eternal stillness of their skies? Let's return to the personal, to you. Imagine stepping outside on a planet that no longer spins. You live, perhaps, in the twilight zone, the narrow strip between endless day and endless night. The sun hangs forever on the horizon, casting the world in a perpetual orange glow. Shadows stretch long and soft. The air is cool but not freezing, warm but not scorching. You walk slowly, breathing deeply, and you think, this is home now. Would you miss the sunrise? Would you long for the surprise of nightfall, the comfort of dawn? Or would you learn to love the steadiness, the predictability, the calm of a sky that never changes? Perhaps, in time, you would forget the old ways. the memory of spinning days would fade into legend, told by storytellers like me. Once, long ago, the earth turned, and the sun rose and set every single day, and children would giggle imagining such a strange, dizzying world. Isn't it strange, then, how easily we forget what is extraordinary in the ordinary? The spinning of earth, the rising of the sun, the falling of night. All of it feels natural, yet it is rare, fragile, precious. So let's end with a reflection. Maybe Earth will never stop spinning. Maybe this question is only a dream, a thought experiment, a bedtime wondering. But in imagining it, don't we come to appreciate the miracle of the present? The lightness in our steps, gifted by centrifugal force. The oceans swelling gently at the equator. The storms that curl and spiral, guided by an invisible spin. All of it woven together into the rhythm of our lives. Tonight, when you lie down, maybe you'll feel the ground beneath you in a new way. Not as something still and solid, but as something alive, turning, dancing, holding you in its embrace. And maybe you'll ask yourself, what if it stopped? Not to frighten yourself, but to remind yourself how beautiful it is that it doesn't. Have you ever stood outside on a windy day and let the breeze wash over you? Maybe you closed your eyes and felt the invisible fingers of air moving across your skin. Perhaps you tilted your head back and let your hair dance in the currents. Wind feels so alive, doesn't it? A reminder that our atmosphere is restless, breathing, moving, forever shifting. But have you ever asked yourself why the wind blows at all? Why doesn't the air simply sit still, like a blanket draped over the earth? The answer, at least in part, is Earth's spin. The turning of our planet is what shapes the great rivers of air in the sky. The trade winds, the jet streams, the swirling cyclones that curve and twist across the oceans. Without that spin, the breath of the planet would be entirely different. So let's ask the question together. What would happen to the winds if Earth stopped spinning? Take a slow breath. Imagine the sky above you. Right now, as the Earth turns, the air turns with it. You don't feel it because it's gentle, steady, like being carried along in a moving train. But the atmosphere has its own inertia, just like you, just like the oceans. If Earth suddenly stopped, the air would not. It would rush forward at more than 1,000 kilometers per hour. Can you imagine winds that fast? Stronger than the fiercest hurricane, faster than the swiftest jet. The world would be torn apart by gales that would flatten forests and scour mountains bare. But let's not dwell too long on sudden violence. Instead, let's take the slower path, the Earth gradually easing its spin, like a dancer slowing her turn. How would the air behave then? Without the Coriolis effect, the invisible force created by Earth's rotation, winds would no longer curve. They would flow directly, simply from hot to cold, from the equator toward the poles. Have you ever watched steam rising straight upward from a cup of tea? Picture something like that, but across the entire planet. Great currents of air marching north and south in rigid lines, unbent, unspiraled. Would that feel calming to you, or eerie? To live in a world where storms no longer spin. And storms themselves, how different would they be? Right now, hurricanes twirl like giant pinwheels because of Earth's spin. Without it, they would not swirl at all. Perhaps there would still be tempests with rain and thunder, but they would move differently. They might surge in straight lines instead of circles, charging like unbroken walls of weather across the land. Could you imagine a thunderstorm without the familiar spiral? Would it feel alien, unnatural, as though the sky had forgotten its own dance? Now let's turn to temperature. The spin of Earth helps distribute warmth by mixing air currents. But without spin, the sunlit side of Earth would bake under constant heat, and the dark side would freeze under eternal night. Winds would flow endlessly between the two extremes, from blazing deserts toward frozen wastes. Would those winds be gentle, like sighs, or fierce, like the breath of a giant? Perhaps they would carve landscapes we cannot imagine. Endless dunes sculpted by steady gales, frozen cliffs polished by constant breezes. Perhaps entire civilizations would build their homes around these predictable winds, harnessing them for power, for travel, for song. Can you hear it? Whole cultures with music shaped by wind, instruments designed to sing with the eternal currents. And what of us? Could we live in such a world? Would we build cities in the twilight zone, where winds flow steadily but not violently, where the balance of heat and cold meets in a golden middle? Could we learn to farm in the breath of constant breezes, planting crops that bend gracefully instead of breaking? I sometimes wonder, if winds lost their spirals, would we lose something more than weather? Would we lose poetry itself? So much of our language is shaped by the sky. We speak of whirlwinds of change, storms that circle, cycles that repeat. In a still earth, the sky would no longer cycle, it would stream. Would our words change too? Would poets speak instead of lines, of rivers, of flows, never of circles? And then, my friend, there is another mystery. The winds do more than move air, they move life. They carry seeds across continents, dust across oceans, even tiny creatures that drift like invisible sailors. Without the Earth's spin, would those journeys end? Would plants no longer leap across the globe, their seeds settling close to home instead of flying on great currents? Would deserts starve without the gift of faraway dust, the nutrients carried on high winds? Have you ever heard that the Amazon rainforest is fed by dust from the Sahara Desert, carried across the Atlantic by steady air currents? Without spin, that invisible connection would break. Would the rainforest wither? Would the desert grow hungrier, emptier, lonelier? It's humbling, isn't it? To realize that even the mightiest forest depends on winds that cross oceans, on currents shaped by the silent spin of our world. And yet, even if the winds changed, life might adapt. Perhaps new forests would grow where winds now carried their gifts. Perhaps new deserts would bloom where stillness ruled. Life has always danced with Earth's rhythms, even when those rhythms shift. Could it be that a motionless Earth would simply create a new kind of music, a new pattern of survival? Let's pause for a moment. Close your eyes if you like. Picture yourself standing in that twilight band between day and night on a stopped Earth. Above you, the sun hangs forever on the horizon. Around you, the wind blows steadily, neither hot nor cold, neither storm nor calm, just a constant breath. How would you feel living in that unchanging breeze? Would you find comfort in its predictability? Or would you long for the surprises of today's world? The sudden storm, the unexpected gust, the wild dance of hurricanes? I think of sailors, ancient ones, who once prayed for wind to carry their ships across the seas. What would they say of a world where winds always blew straight, never circling, never stalling? Would their songs still be filled with mystery? Or would they become practical, resigned, humming tunes of steady travel instead of perilous adventure? And I think, too, of children. Children who chase kites and laugh as the wind tugs them upward. Would kites still fly in such a world? Of course, yes. But would the joy feel the same if the wind never changed, never surprised, never shifted suddenly to lift the kite higher than expected? Perhaps they would still laugh. Perhaps they would learn to find wonder not in chaos, but in constancy. Isn't that a lesson for us, too? To find beauty not only in the storm, but in the steady breeze? So what would happen to the winds if Earth stopped spinning? They would roar at first, yes. They would flatten, destroy, reshape. But given time, they would settle into new patterns, new flows, new songs. The sky would no longer whirl, but it would still breathe. And life would listen, adjust, and sing along. Maybe, in the end, that is the real wonder. That even if our world stopped its dance, the air would still move, the oceans would still flow, and life would still find a way to join the rhythm. Different, yes. Strange, yes. But still alive, still moving, still carried by the breath of Earth. And as you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you will hear the wind outside your window with new ears. A gentle reminder that the spin of our planet whispers in every breeze, every rustle of leaves, every sigh of the atmosphere. And maybe you will ask yourself, if the wind changed forever, would I miss the world I know? Or would I learn to love the new music of a still Earth? Have you ever noticed how much of life depends on light? Not just the way it helps you see, not just the way it warms your skin on a cool morning, but the way it sets the rhythm of everything around you. Plants tilt their leaves toward it. Animals stir with its coming and rest with its leaving. You yourself wake with its rise and drift into sleep when it fades. Light is not only illumination, it is time itself. But what if time, as we know it, were broken? What if the earth stopped spinning, and day and night no longer danced across the sky? Let's ask the question gently. What would happen to sunlight if the earth stood still? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the familiar rhythm of the sun. Rising, setting, rising again. A golden wheel in the heavens, rolling endlessly. That wheel turns not because the sun moves around us, but because we spin beneath it. Without our turning, the sun would no longer cross the sky. It would hang in one place, fixed, unblinking. On one side of Earth, it would be eternal day. On the other, eternal night. What would that feel like, to live in a world divided so absolutely? On the day side, the sun would never relent. It would pour down, hour after hour, century after century. The heat would build, rising higher and higher, until deserts stretched endlessly across the land. Could anything survive under that merciless gaze? Perhaps plants would wither, soils would crack, rivers would vanish into steam, or perhaps some hardy, unimaginable forms of life would evolve. Plants with leaves like mirrors, reflecting the sun's fury, or creatures that burrow deep to escape the light, surfacing only briefly to sip energy before retreating again. And on the night side, the night side. Picture it. A landscape cloaked in endless darkness. The stars overhead never move, frozen in place like jewels pinned to black velvet. The moon, if it appears at all, hangs in one eternal phase. No sunrise to brighten the horizon. No dawn chorus of birdsong. Only silence. Only frost creeping deeper, thicker, until oceans turn to ice and mountains vanish beneath frozen seas. Would you prefer to live in the light or the dark? Which side feels more like home to you? The scorched, blazing world of eternal day, or the frozen, starlit world of eternal night? But wait, there is a third place, isn't there? The twilight band, the narrow strip where day meets night, where the sun forever hovers on the horizon. Imagine standing there, the sky painted in shades of orange and violet that never fade. Shadows stretch endlessly. The light is soft, neither burning nor absent. Wouldn't that be the most habitable place, the safest refuge for humanity? Could entire civilizations flourish in that golden band of dusk? Farms bathed in gentle, perpetual light. Cities built with windows always glowing. Streets never needing lamps, never knowing darkness. Would people there forget what a sunrise even means? Would the idea of a sun climbing and setting become a legend, told in bedtime stories of a restless, turning world long past? And think of the night side again. Do you think people might live there, too, despite the cold? Imagine underground cities warmed by geothermal heat, glowing softly with artificial suns, while above them, the surface is a frozen desert. Perhaps explorers would travel to the surface, gazing at stars that never change, mapping constellations that remain forever fixed. Would they feel comfort in that unchanging sky, or would it weigh on them, the endless sameness pressing down like ice? And what of the day side? Could anyone endure it? Perhaps people would build shelters deep underground, venturing out only at dusk, wearing reflective suits like shining mirrors. Or perhaps no human would survive there at all, leaving it to plants and creatures yet unknown, born to thrive under eternal fire. Isn't it haunting to think of a world where day and night are no longer shared experiences? Right now, wherever you stand on Earth, you know that half the world sleeps while the other half stirs. You can look up and know the sun is setting somewhere, rising somewhere else. But if the Earth stopped spinning, that rhythm would be lost. Humanity itself might fracture into two kinds of people, those of the day, those of the night. Would they even understand each other? Would their cultures, their stories, their very bodies grow so different that they no longer felt like one species? And here's another question. What would happen to the animals? Migratory birds navigate by the shifting sun. Turtles hatch by the pull of moonlight. Plants flower by the length of the day. If the sun no longer moved, would those rhythms vanish? Would animals lose their way, confused by skies that never changed? Or would they adapt, carving out new patterns, inventing new instincts? Can you imagine a bird that never migrates because the seasons no longer exist? A flower that never closes because the sun never leaves? Would such a world feel alive, or eerily still, as though time itself had stopped breathing? And what of us, what of you? Could you live in such a world? Could you sleep without nightfall? Could you wake without dawn? Perhaps, in the twilight band, people would invent their own rhythms. They might divide their lives not by the sun but by bells, by candles, by songs. They might create artificial days, not tied to the sky, but to human choice. Doesn't that make you wonder whether time is something we obey, or something we invent? There is also the matter of beauty. Would you miss the sunrise? That first blush of gold spilling across the horizon. The way it fills you with hope, with possibility. Would you miss sunsets? Those brief, fiery farewells that paint the world in color? Imagine never seeing one again. Would your heart ache for them? Or would you find beauty in the unchanging? An eternal twilight, a sky forever glowing like a painting that never fades. And yet, there is something oddly comforting about imagining such permanence. No surprises, no rush, the sun hanging steady, the stars unmoving. Perhaps life in that world would feel less frantic, less hurried. Would people live more slowly, more calmly, without the ticking of days and nights? Could we, in such stillness, learn a different kind of peace? But there is danger too. Without day and night, the very engine of our planet's climate would shift. The day side would heat endlessly. The night side would freeze endlessly. Winds would roar between them, carrying scorching air into the cold, sweeping icy breath into the heat. Could we harness those winds for power, for travel, for survival? Or would they tear our fragile shelters apart? It is strange, isn't it, how one small change, the stopping of Earth's spin, ripples outward into everything. Into light, into weather, into culture, into the beating hearts of living things. So let's step back. Let's look up at the sky tonight and ask, do we take the movement of the sun for granted? Do we thank the Earth for its spin, for the simple gift of morning and evening, of stars that move, of shadows that shift? Maybe tomorrow, when the sun rises, you'll pause a little longer. Maybe you'll smile, knowing that this rhythm is not guaranteed, but given. And maybe, when it sets again, you'll whisper a quiet thank you, not just to the sun, but to the Earth itself for turning, for dancing, for giving us the gift of time. And as you drift into sleep, ask yourself one last question. If the sun stood still in your sky, would you mourn the loss of sunrise? Or would you learn to live in the eternity of twilight? Have you ever wondered why we have seasons? It seems so natural that spring follows winter, that summer fades into autumn. The blooming of flowers, the harvest of fields, the long nights of winter. All of it feels inevitable, like the heartbeat of the world. But seasons are not guaranteed. They are gifts of movement, of Earth's tilt, of Earth's spin, of Earth's eternal dance around the sun. So let us ask together, what would happen to the seasons if Earth stopped spinning? Take a moment to picture our world as it is now. The Earth tilts at just over 23 degrees, leaning like a dancer bowing gracefully. As it spins, day and night sweep across the globe. As it orbits the sun, that tilt creates the seasons, warmth in one hemisphere, coolness in the other, alternating with the year. Do you feel how delicate that balance is? A tilt, a spin, a journey, all intertwined to create the rhythm of life. But imagine the spin slowing, fading, stopping. Would the seasons remain? Would the cycle of spring, summer, autumn, winter continue as we know it? Or would time itself lose its pattern? Let's wander gently into this thought. If Earth suddenly stopped, day and night would vanish. One side of the planet would face the sun forever, the other would hide in endless darkness. Seasons, as we know them, would collapse. The sunlit side would bake into desert. The dark side would freeze into wasteland. But if Earth slowed gradually, if the spin weakened over ages, the story might unfold more softly. At first, days would lengthen. Have you ever had a summer evening that seemed to last forever? The sun hanging in the sky, reluctant to leave? Imagine that stretching farther and farther, until days themselves last weeks, months, years. Would summer become one long, blazing age? Would winter become a frozen epic, with no relief in sight? What would spring mean if it took decades for flowers to bloom? What would autumn mean if leaves clung to their branches for centuries before falling? And what of us? Could humans adapt to such seasons? Could you imagine being born into a spring that lasted your entire childhood, only to see summer begin as you grew old? Would time itself feel different? Would you measure life not in years, but in seasons lived? Perhaps elders would say, I was born in spring and died in autumn, their whole lives unfolding in the turning of one great season. Isn't that a haunting thought? To live your life beneath a single sky, to never know the full circle of the year. And what of crops? Right now, farmers plant in spring, harvest in summer, rest in winter. But if one season lasted for centuries, how would we grow food? Could we invent greenhouses, underground farms, artificial lights to mimic the vanished rhythm? Or would we learn to live entirely differently, storing harvests for generations, planting not for ourselves but for our descendants? And animals, what of them? Birds migrate by the changing seasons. Insects hatch by the warmth of spring. Bears sleep through winter. Flowers bloom with sunlight. If the spin slowed, their instincts would falter. Would birds fly endlessly, searching for a season that never comes? Would flowers bloom too long, exhausting themselves under endless days? Would winter animals fall into slumber and never wake again? Perhaps new life would emerge instead. Animals that thrive in endless day, basking in the heat. Creatures that endure in eternal night, glowing softly to guide their way. Plants that bloom for centuries, their roots deep, their patience infinite. Could you picture such beings? Would they be beautiful or strange, comforting or alien? Now, think of the people who might live in the twilight zone, that narrow strip between endless light and endless dark. Would they know seasons at all? Or would their world be forever balanced, forever mild, forever in between? Imagine living in a land where the sky never changes, where the temperature is always the same, where crops grow steadily year after year. Would life there feel heavenly in its stability, or dull in its sameness? Would people there long for the drama of seasons, the thrill of change, the joy of spring after winter's hardship? And what of culture? So much of our art, our music, our rituals are tied to the seasons. We celebrate the harvest, we sing of spring, we mourn in winter. If seasons vanished, what would happen to those stories? Would we invent new ones? Perhaps new festivals of light and dark, new traditions tied to survival instead of cycles. Perhaps entire mythologies would rise around the eternal sun and the eternal night. Do you think we would still write poetry about the turning of the year? Or would that memory fade, like an old song no one sings anymore? Let's return for a moment to the science. Without Earth's spin, the tilt would still remain. The sunlit side would still receive more direct rays near the equator, while the poles would remain cooler. But without the daily rotation, the heating would become extreme, unbalanced. The day side would scorch, the night side would freeze. The tilt might still create differences in sunlight over the orbit of a year, but what would that matter if one side never saw the sun at all? Would we still call that a season? Or would it be something else entirely, something alien to us? And yet, I wonder, perhaps humanity, stubborn and inventive, would find ways to create our own seasons. Artificial days, artificial years, controlled environments where crops grow under lamps, where children wake and sleep by clocks instead of skies. Would that world feel mechanical, colder, less alive? Or would it feel safe, ordered, predictable, free from the chaos of weather and seasons? But would you miss the seasons, truly? Would you miss the joy of spring's first flowers, the sweetness of ripe summer fruit, the crisp bite of autumn air, the hush of winter snow? Or would you learn to love the new rhythms, the constancy, the eternal twilight? Sometimes I think the beauty of seasons is not only in their presence but in their passing. We treasure spring because it is brief. We savor autumn because it slips away. If Earth stopped spinning and seasons vanished, would we lose that sense of impermanence? Would life feel flatter, less vivid? without the bittersweet knowledge that every moment is fleeting? So perhaps the real gift of imagining a still Earth is that it reminds us to treasure the spinning one we have, to notice the miracle of changing seasons, to pause and watch the leaves fall, knowing they fall because our planet dances, to smile at the first snow, knowing it is born of tilt and spin, to breathe deeply in springtime, knowing it arrives because the Earth turns, endlessly, faithfully, beneath our feet. And maybe, tonight, as you close your eyes, you'll think of seasons differently, not as something ordinary, but as something wondrous, fragile, given. And you'll ask yourself, if the Earth stopped spinning, what season would I choose to live in forever? Would it be spring, eternal with blossoms? Summer, endless with warmth? Autumn, forever painted in fire? Or winter, timeless in its stillness? And perhaps your answer will tell you something not only about the planet, but about yourself. Have you ever listened to the ocean? Not just the crash of waves on the shore, but the deeper sound, the endless, breathing hush of the sea itself. Sometimes, when you stand by the coast at night, it feels as if the ocean is whispering to you, telling stories older than any mountain, older than any human word. And in a way it is, because the oceans remember Earth's spin. They have been shaped by it, stirred by it, carried by it, for billions of years. But let's ask the question together. What would happen to the oceans if Earth stopped spinning? Imagine yourself standing on a beach right now. The tide pulls in, the tide pulls out. The waves rise, the waves fall. The sea feels eternal in its rhythm. But it is not eternal. Its dance is tied to gravity, to the moon, to the spin of our planet. Without spin, the seas would change forever. First, think of inertia. Right now, the oceans spin with the Earth, just as you do, just as the air does. If Earth suddenly stopped, the oceans would not. They would surge forward with unimaginable force, rushing across the continents, drowning coastlines, tearing cities apart. Entire oceans would try to move inland, like giants rising from their beds. Can you picture it? Water towers higher than mountains, thundering across the land, carrying everything away in their path. Would there be anything left standing after such a flood? But let us slow down. Catastrophe is too quick, too sharp. Let's imagine the gentler path, the Earth slowing gradually. What would the oceans do then? Right now, because of Earth's spin, the oceans are not evenly distributed. At the equator, the spin flings water outward, creating a bulge more than 40 meters high. You don't see it when you stand on the shore, but it is there, a swelling of the sea that wraps around the middle of the world. If Earth stopped spinning, that bulge would collapse. The oceans would slowly flow toward the poles, drowning some lands and uncovering others. Picture a map of the world, but not the one you know. Imagine deserts stretching across the equator, dry land where once there was sea. Imagine the poles swelling with new oceans, coastlines reshaped, entire nations vanished beneath the rising water. Would humanity move with the oceans, following the new seas? Would we build new ports in the far north and south, abandoning equatorial lands to dust? And what about the tides? Do you know that tides are born from both the moon's pull and Earth's spin? Without spin, tides would still exist, pulled by the moon, but they would be different, slower, stranger, perhaps even more extreme in some places. Could we still sail by them? Could fishermen still trust them? Or would the sea become unpredictable, shifting in ways no one could remember, no one could predict? Now think of currents, the great rivers of the sea. The Gulf Stream, the Kuroshio, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. They are driven not only by temperature and salt, but by Earth's rotation. Without spin, those rivers would falter. Warm water would no longer flow northward to soften winters in Europe. Cold water would no longer circle Antarctica in endless isolation. The seas would stagnate, layer upon layer, unmixed. What would that mean for life? Plankton bloom in upwelling currents, feeding fish, feeding whales, feeding everything. Without spin, those upwellings might cease. Could the oceans starve? Could the great whales vanish, the coral reefs wither, the shoals of fish dissolve into silence? And yet, perhaps new life would appear. Creatures suited to still seas, drifting slowly in waters unmixed. Plants glowing in the depths, feeding not on sunlight but on chemical whispers rising from the seafloor. Would such oceans feel alien to us or simply new? I wonder too about the sounds. The ocean is full of voices, waves crashing, whales singing, ice cracking, storms roaring. But if Earth stopped spinning, would those sounds change? Would the silence of still seas replace the music we know? Or would new songs rise? Winds howling differently, waters rushing toward poles, ice grinding endlessly in the dark? Could we still find beauty in that alien music? Now let's ask another question. What would happen to the people who live by the sea? Right now, billions of humans live along coasts, their lives tied to tides, to fishing, to trade. If the seas moved, if coastlines drowned or dried, where would those people go? Would they flee inland, leaving empty cities behind? Or would they build floating towns, drifting on the oceans wherever they moved, becoming children of the sea in a deeper sense? And imagine the twilight zone, the strip between eternal day and eternal night. There, the oceans might be the most alive. On the day side, seas would boil and evaporate. On the night side, they would freeze into walls of ice. But in the twilight, perhaps oceans would remain liquid, warmed by winds, cooled by currents. Could life thrive there? Could humanity sail forever beneath an orange sky, building ships that never needed to fear nightfall? Would you live there on that twilight ocean? Would you set sail across waters that never darken, never brighten, only glow with endless sunset? Can you picture the reflections? The sea turned to molten gold, the sky painted in fire, the horizon eternal? But perhaps we must also think of loss. The oceans, as we know them, cradle our climate. They breathe carbon, they carry heat, they soften storms. Without their currents, without their tides, the Earth's climate would unravel. Monsoons would vanish, deserts would expand, storms would reshape themselves. Could we adapt? Could we find new ways to live when the seas no longer breathe with us? And yet, perhaps it is not only loss. Perhaps it is transformation. Perhaps the seas would teach us new lessons, offer us new gifts. Perhaps the frozen nightside oceans would store secrets, preserved for millennia. Perhaps the boiling dayside seas would create new minerals, new sources of power. Perhaps the twilight oceans would bloom with strange new life, luminous and eternal. Do you think humanity would find a way to survive there? I like to think so. We have always followed the seas. We built boats before we built cities. We crossed waters before we crossed deserts. The ocean has always been our teacher, our path, our mirror. If it changed, would we not change too? Let's pause here and listen again to the sea. The sound you know today, the rhythm of waves and tides, it is born of Earth's spin. Each wave that curls and crashes carries the memory of motion. If Earth ever stopped, that memory would vanish. The sea would find a new rhythm, a new breath. Would we find it beautiful? Would we find it terrifying? Or would we, as always, learn to listen and to call it home? So, tonight, as you lie in bed, perhaps you'll imagine the oceans differently. Not just as blue water stretching to the horizon, but as something alive, tied to the heartbeat of the spinning Earth. And maybe you'll ask yourself, if the seas changed forever, would I mourn the oceans I knew? Or would I set sail on the new ones, ready to learn their secrets? Have you ever looked up at the stars and felt small? There's a kind of hush that comes when you really see them, not just as pinpricks of light, but as suns, as galaxies, as endlessness. And in that hush, maybe a thought comes to you. The sky is not just beautiful, it is moving. The stars shift, slowly, predictably, across the heavens because the Earth beneath you is spinning. But what if that spin stopped? What if the sky froze forever? Let us ask it gently. What would happen to the stars if Earth stood still? Right now, when you look at the night sky, you see motion even if you don't notice it. The stars rise in the east, drift overhead, and set in the west, carried by Earth's turning. The constellations march across the seasons. The North Star holds steady while others circle around it. It is all a dance, written not in the stars themselves, but in our own spinning perspective. If Earth stopped, that dance would end. The stars would no longer rise or set. They would become eternal companions, frozen in their places. Imagine that for a moment. You step outside at night. You look up, and there they are, Orion, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades, whatever constellations you love. And the next night, they are still there, unchanged. A week later, a month later, a year later, they have not moved. They never will. Would that feel comforting to you, to have the same sky every night? Or would it feel eerie, as though time itself had stopped? Astronomers would lose their calendars. Farmers, too. For thousands of years, people have used the stars to tell time, to mark seasons, to guide journeys. Without Earth's spin, the heavens would no longer turn, no longer guide. The sky would become a still painting, not a clock. Would we still look up for meaning, or would we turn away, hearts aching for the motion we lost? And think of the sun. On the day side of Earth, it would hang forever in one place in the sky. At noon, always noon. At dawn, always dawn. At sunset, always sunset. On the night side, it would never rise again. The stars there would be fixed forever. Would children born in that world even understand the idea of a moving sky? Or would it seem like fantasy, a story told by elders of a restless Earth that once spun? I wonder how culture would change. Our myths are full of skies that move. Gods carry the sun across the heavens. Heroes chase the moon. Time itself is tied to the rising and setting of stars. If the sky stood still, what stories would we tell? Would we invent gods of stillness instead of motion? Would our myths speak not of journeys but of permanence? And what about you? Could you imagine living under a sky that never changed? Would you find peace in its constancy? Or would you long for the thrill of a shooting star, the drama of a rising moon, the comfort of the turning constellations? Now let's look at the science. Even if Earth stopped spinning, the stars would still move very slowly because of Earth's orbit around the sun. Over a year, the constellations would shift. But that shift would be gradual, almost imperceptible compared to the daily rising and setting we know. Would you notice it? Perhaps only if you were patient, watching the sky with devotion, marking each change like a monk counting beads. And the moon, what of the moon? Right now, it rises and sets because Earth spins. Without spin, it too would hang frozen. Always in the same place, always in the same phase. A crescent forever. A full moon forever. Would that be beautiful or unsettling? Could you imagine a moon that never changed, never cycled, never guided tides as it does now? Here's another question. Navigation has always relied on the sky. Sailors once steered their ships by the stars. Travelers found their way by the constellations. Even today, though we have GPS, the stars remain a kind of compass in our imagination. Without their motion, would navigation lose its poetry? Would the stars become less of a map and more of a ceiling, something to look at but not to use? But perhaps people would invent new ways of seeing meaning in a still sky. Perhaps they would find patterns not in movement, but in light itself, measuring brightness, counting twinkles, learning to read the silence of stars instead of their journey. And then, there is the question of beauty. Would the sky still inspire us if it no longer moved? Would lovers still lie on their backs and whisper wishes to stars that never fell? Would poets still write of heavens that never changed? Or would beauty itself shift, from motion to stillness, from rhythm to constancy? Let me ask you something personal. When you think of the night sky, what image comes to mind? Is it the sweep of the Milky Way, glowing faintly across the darkness? Is it the rising moon, silver and calm? Is it the slow drifting of stars overhead as the hours pass? Whatever it is, know that all of those images are born of Earth's spin. Without it, your memory of the sky would be entirely different. Would you still love it? Perhaps you would. Perhaps the stillness would carry its own peace. To step outside and know the sky is always the same. That could be comforting, like a steady hand resting on your shoulder. No surprises, no storms of time, only the eternal gaze of the stars. But perhaps, too, you would ache for change. For the joy of watching Orion rise and vanish, for the thrill of catching a glimpse of Venus at dawn, for the wonder of constellations shifting with the seasons. Perhaps you would miss the reminder that time passes, that life moves, that nothing stays the same. And maybe that is the deeper truth. The moving sky teaches us impermanence. It reminds us that we are travelers, not statues, that life is change, not stasis. Would we lose that lesson if the earth stood still? Let's pause here. Picture yourself in the twilight zone, that narrow band between day and night. Look up. The sun hangs forever on the horizon, glowing orange. The stars above you never shift. The moon, if you see it, is frozen in place. The sky is beautiful but unmoving. Would you feel at peace or restless? Perhaps humanity would adapt. Perhaps we would create our own skies. Moving lights projected into domes, artificial stars that rise and set, sun lamps that mimic dawn and dusk. Perhaps we would tell our children, "This is what the sky used to do," and they would gasp in wonder, unable to imagine such a restless heaven. But would they believe us? Would they think we were making it up like fairy tales? Sometimes I think about this. If Earth had never spun, if the sky had always been still, would we even imagine a moving one? Would we dream of stars that rise and set? Would we tell myths of suns that cross the sky? Or would the very idea of motion in the heavens be beyond us? Isn't it strange how much our imagination is shaped by the world we live in? So what would happen to the stars if Earth stopped spinning? They would freeze. They would become eternal companions, silent and unchanging. Navigation would falter. Myths would shift. Beauty would transform. And humanity would adapt as we always do. But tonight, as you look up, notice the stars drifting. Notice how they move, slowly, gently across the sky. That motion is Earth's gift to you, a reminder that you are part of a turning world, part of a dance, part of a rhythm that has shaped human wonder for all of history. And maybe you'll ask yourself softly, if the stars never moved again, would I treasure them more or less? Have you ever thought about how much we depend on gravity? Feels invisible, ordinary. You stand, you walk, you sit down, and the earth holds you close without effort. You drop a pebble and it falls. You pour water and it flows downward. Gravity is the quiet constant, the faithful hand that never lets go. But here's a question worth asking slowly. What would happen to gravity if Earth stopped spinning? At first glance, you might think nothing at all. Gravity is the pull of mass, not of spin. The Earth would still be massive, still pull everything toward its center. You would still be pressed to the ground, your teacup would still sit on the table, the moon would still orbit us. But is it truly so simple? Let's wander carefully into this mystery. Right now, you weigh slightly less than you should. Did you know that? At the equator, the Earth's spin gives you a small lift. The centrifugal force, the outward push of rotation, tugs against gravity just a little. Not much, less than 1%. But it's there. If Earth stopped spinning, that outward push would vanish, and you would feel the full pull of gravity. Would you notice? Imagine stepping on a scale and seeing a number a kilogram higher than yesterday. Imagine climbing a flight of stairs and feeling it just a little more in your legs. Would you sigh at the heaviness, or smile, realizing you were now tasting Earth's true embrace? Now think about the oceans again. They too are lightened by Earth's spin. At the equator, the centrifugal effect makes the sea swell outward into a bulge more than 40 meters high. If Earth stopped spinning, gravity would pull that bulge back. The oceans would flow toward the poles, flooding coastlines there, leaving equatorial lands exposed. Isn't that remarkable? The very shape of Earth is sculpted by spin. Without it, the planet would become rounder, smoother, less like a dancer in motion, more like a stone at rest. Would it still feel like the Earth we know? Or would it seem alien, wearing a face we could barely recognize? And here's another thought. If you live closer to the poles, you already feel more of Earth's true gravity. At the equator, you are slightly lighter. At the poles, you are slightly heavier. So if Earth stopped spinning, people at the poles would barely notice the difference, while those at the equator would feel it most. Doesn't that make you wonder, if humanity had only evolved at the poles, would we have even noticed Earth was spinning at all? Let's move deeper. Gravity shapes not just weight, but climate, water, even air. With stronger effective gravity, no centrifugal lift, the atmosphere itself would settle more tightly against Earth. The air would compress slightly, hugging closer to the surface. Would the sky feel different? Would the clouds seem lower, the air denser, the winds sharper? Perhaps storms would behave differently, rain falling heavier, snow packing tighter. And yet, gravity is not only a physical force. It is also a metaphor. We speak of gravity to mean seriousness, importance, weight. If Earth stopped spinning and gravity's embrace tightened, would we feel it in our hearts as well? Would the world itself feel heavier, more solemn, less playful? But here's the deeper layer. Gravity is not alone in shaping our lives. The spin of Earth and the gravity of Earth are partners. Spin lightens, balances, reshapes. Gravity grounds, centers, pulls close. Together, they make the world we know. If spin vanished, gravity would dominate, uncompromising. Would life feel less balanced, more constricted? And what of space? Gravity keeps the moon circling us. Gravity holds satellites in orbit. But those orbits are balanced by speed, by motion. If Earth stopped spinning, satellites in low orbit would still race around us. But the ground beneath them would no longer turn. They would pass overhead more quickly, their paths shifting relative to Earth's surface. Would our communication networks survive? Would our space stations adjust? Or would the heavens above seem restless, out of step with the planet below? And the moon, would it change? No, Earth's spin is not what holds the moon. But over billions of years, the moon has been slowing Earth's spin with its pull, giving us tides, lengthening our days. If Earth stopped, that ancient conversation would end. Would the moon seem lonelier, circling a partner that no longer danced? Now pause for a moment. Imagine yourself walking outside in this still Earth. You feel heavier just slightly. The air presses closer, denser. The sea is no longer swelling at the equator but has crept toward the poles. The ground feels firmer, the pull of gravity more insistent. Would you feel safer, grounded more deeply? Or would you feel trapped, as though Earth's embrace had grown too tight? And consider culture again. So much of human thought is shaped by the balance between heaviness and lightness. We write of things uplifting, of burdens weighing us down. If gravity grew stronger by even a fraction, would we find ourselves speaking differently? Would we create new metaphors for heaviness, new myths about a world that grew more weighty when it stopped spinning? Could you imagine a people who remembered the lighter Earth as a kind of paradise, telling stories of ancestors who could leap higher, run faster, dance more freely under a gentler sky? Would they long for that lost lightness, or embrace the new solidity as strength? And what of our bodies? Evolution has tuned us to the balance of spin and gravity we know now. If the Earth stopped and effective gravity increased, even a little, would our bones strengthen, our muscles thicken, our postures change over generations? Would we grow shorter, sturdier, heavier in frame? Would humans of the still Earth be broader, more grounded, less airy in spirit? Isn't it fascinating how even a subtle change in gravity could ripple outward into the very shape of our descendants? But gravity is also connection. It holds the Earth to the sun, the moon to Earth, us to the ground. If Earth stopped spinning, those connections would remain. The solar system would not collapse. The stars would not fall. Life might change, even struggle, but gravity would still bind us to the cosmos. Doesn't that feel comforting? To know that even if the spin vanished, the pull would remain. That some bonds are stronger than change. Let's return to the personal for a moment. Imagine lying down tonight on a still Earth. You feel the mattress pressing a little more firmly, your body a little heavier. You breathe the denser air. Outside, the stars do not move. The world feels steady, grounded, perhaps even solemn. Would you drift into sleep feeling safe in gravity's embrace? Or would you long for the lightness, the hidden lift, the spin that once carried you? So what would happen to gravity if Earth stopped spinning? It would grow stronger, yes, just slightly, but enough to reshape seas, skies, lives. The balance would shift. The world would feel heavier. And humanity would adapt, as always, learning to live in a gravity more absolute. But perhaps the real lesson is this: We do not live by gravity alone. We live by balance between pull and spin, weight and lift, heaviness and lightness. The Earth's turning gives us that balance, and without it, life itself would feel changed. So tonight, when you walk, when you stretch, when you leap lightly from step to step, remember, you are not feeling gravity alone. You are feeling Earth's spin as well, softening the pull, giving you a touch of lightness, a whisper of freedom. And maybe you'll ask yourself softly, if that lightness vanished, would I treasure it more? Have you ever thought about how deeply our lives are woven into time? We wake at certain hours. We eat meals at certain times. We measure our days in minutes, our years in seasons, our lives in decades. Time feels like the air, always present, invisible, unquestioned. But have you ever asked yourself, what if time itself were different? What if the spinning of Earth, the very engine of our 24-hour day, were to stop? Let's linger gently in this thought. Right now, the spin of Earth is what gives us our days and nights. One rotation equals one day. Simple, steady, eternal. But if Earth stopped spinning, that measure would vanish. There would be no day, no night. Just one half of Earth bathed in endless light, the other drowned in endless dark. Time, as we know it, would fracture. What would it mean to live in such a world? Imagine waking in the twilight zone, the narrow strip where the sun forever hangs at the horizon. There is no morning, no afternoon, no evening. Only eternal dawn or eternal dusk. Would you keep a clock? Would you glance at it, even though the sky outside never changed? Or would you throw it away, tired of measuring hours that no longer exist? Perhaps people would invent new rhythms. Instead of saying, I'll meet you at 3 o'clock, they might say, I'll meet you after 2 meals. Or, I'll meet you when the candle burns halfway down. Could you live like that, counting time by actions, by breaths, by heartbeats, instead of by the hands of a clock? And what of sleep? Right now, we drift off because night comes, because darkness tells our bodies it is time to rest. Without that cue, would we sleep at all? Would we wander restlessly under eternal twilight, unsure when to close our eyes? Or would we invent our own schedules, deciding for ourselves when it was night, even if the sky disagreed? Isn't it strange to realize how much we obey the sun without even thinking? Think, too, of the stories we tell. Myths, religions, cultures, all shaped by time. Sunrise and sunset are woven into prayer. Calendars shape harvests and festivals. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, all depend on the turning of Earth. If that turning stopped, what would happen to those traditions? Would we still celebrate New Year if there were no days to count? Would we still sing of morning and evening if the sky never changed? Perhaps new traditions would rise. Maybe people on the day side would celebrate shade festivals, honoring the rare shadows they created to shield themselves from endless sun. Maybe those on the night side would hold light gatherings, gathering around artificial suns, rejoicing in man-made dawn. Would you join those festivals? Would you feel joy in the rituals of survival, even if they replaced the familiar rhythm of days? Now let's step into science. Our bodies are governed by circadian rhythms, internal clocks tuned to the cycle of day and night. Without that cycle, our rhythms would falter. We might sleep too long or too little, lose track of days, drift into confusion. Could humanity survive without the ticking of light and dark in our biology? Perhaps we would adapt slowly. Perhaps our internal clocks would stretch to new rhythms, tuned not to 24 hours, but to whatever schedule we invented. But would we feel the same? Would we feel truly human without that daily rising and setting? And think of animals. Birds sing at dawn. Wolves hunt at dusk. Flowers bloom with sunrise. If Earth stopped spinning, would those creatures vanish, their rhythms destroyed? Or would they find new patterns, new instincts? Imagine a flower that blooms under artificial lamps instead of sunlight. Imagine an owl that hunts whenever humans dim the lights, not when night falls. Life is endlessly adaptable. But would it still feel wild? Or would it feel tamed by stillness? And what about children born into such a world? Imagine growing up never seeing a sunrise, never watching the sun climb, blaze, and fade. Would you even believe the stories of a world that once turned? Or would you think they were fairy tales, myths of a restless earth told by dreamers? I wonder, too, how we would measure age. Right now, we count in years, in birthdays, in the number of times Earth has circled the sun. But without days to divide those years, would age feel different? Would you say, I am 30 years old? Or would you say, I have lived through 3 harvests of crops? Or, I have seen 6 great storms? Would time itself become more event-based, less numerical? And would that be so bad? Sometimes our clocks feel tyrannical, don't they? Always ticking, always reminding us of time slipping away. Maybe in a world without spin, we would be freed from that tyranny. Maybe we would live more slowly, more mindfully, not by numbers but by moments. Could that be a gift hidden inside the loss? Now let's step into the twilight zone again. Imagine walking through a city there. The streets glow with lamps, though the sun hangs forever on the horizon. Shops open and close not by clock but by custom. People wake when they wish, sleep when they wish, work when they can. Time feels less rigid, more fluid, like a river without banks. Would you find that liberating or disorienting? And what of the day side? Under eternal sun, time would blur. Without darkness, how would people know when to rest? Would they live in constant fatigue? Or would they create underground havens where artificial night gave their bodies peace? Could you imagine living in a city that sleeps beneath the earth, emerging only for work and harvest, retreating again to the comfort of human-made dusk? And the night side, what would time mean there? With no sunrise ever to break the horizon, would people mark their lives by stars? Would they say, I was born when Orion was overhead? Or, I came of age when the comet passed? Could entire cultures learn to tell time not by the moving sun, but by the shifting galaxies? Wouldn't that be beautiful, to live by the rhythm of stars instead of the ticking of hours? But perhaps the most haunting question is this: would we lose the very concept of day? The word itself, day, means the span of one spin of Earth. Without spin, day would mean nothing. Would our languages change? Would we invent new words? Light side, dark side, glow time, shadow time, to describe our lives? Would time itself feel more like geography than motion, more like place than journey? Think, too, of memory. Our lives are built on days. We say, that was a good day. Or, I remember the day we met. Without days, how would we remember? Would we instead recall by events? I remember during the long light. I remember in the season of storms? Would memory itself grow more fluid, less sharp, less bound to numbers? And what of our hearts? Isn't there something comforting about the return of dawn, the promise that night will end, that light will come again? If that promise were broken, if the sun never rose or set again, would hope itself change? Would we learn to find hope not in cycles, but in endurance, in constancy, in survival? Perhaps we would. Perhaps humanity would prove, as it always has, that we can adapt. We would invent new ways to tell time, new ways to sleep, new ways to hope. And yet, perhaps we would still ache, deep inside, for the lost rhythm of rising and setting, of days that begin and end. So what would happen to time if Earth stopped spinning? It would fracture. It would become human-made, event-based, cultural instead of natural. Clocks would lose their power. Seasons would stretch into epochs. Days would vanish. And we, restless, imaginative creatures, would find new ways to count, new ways to live, new ways to dream. But tonight, as you glance at the clock, perhaps you'll see it differently. Each tick is a gift of Earth's spin. Each day, each night, each hour, all born from the turning of our planet. Maybe you'll whisper a quiet thank you to the Earth for its steady rhythm. And maybe, softly, you'll ask yourself, if the days disappeared, would I live more slowly or more fully? Do you ever stop and wonder about the winds? We feel them every day, sometimes only as a whisper against our skin, other times as a howling force that bends trees and rattles windows. But have you ever asked yourself, what would become of the winds if Earth stopped spinning? It's easy to forget that the air around us is always in motion, always traveling, always dancing with invisible steps. The spin of Earth sets much of that dance in motion, shaping great rivers of air called jet streams, twisting storms into spirals, and spreading warmth across the globe. Without that spin, the choreography would collapse. But into what? Chaos? Stillness? Or something strange and new? Let's explore this together, slowly, like walking into a gentle breeze. Right now, because Earth spins, the Coriolis effect bends the paths of winds. That's why hurricanes twist like enormous pinwheels, and why storms spiral instead of marching in straight lines. But if Earth stood still, that effect would vanish. Storms would no longer spin, they would surge. Hurricanes, as we know them, would dissolve. Winds would no longer curl gracefully around pressure systems. They would crash head-on, like waves against a wall. Can you picture it? A storm without swirl. A storm that simply roars forward in a direct line, uncurved, unsoftened. Would such storms be fiercer or weaker? Would they strike with the precision of arrows? Or would they lose the structure that makes hurricanes so devastating? And what of the jet streams, those swift rivers of air high above us? Right now, they sweep across continents, steering weather, carrying storms. They exist because Earth spins. Without that spin, they would fade. The sky would lose its invisible rivers. Would weather itself become slower, more sluggish, less varied? Or would it grow harsher, divided into extremes? Roaring heat on one side, endless frost on the other? Let's think of the day side first. The sun would blaze there without rest, heating land and sea until they scorched. Warm air rises, doesn't it? Always. And as it rose in this eternal day, it would create vast towers of hot, upward currents. The air would rush away from the blazing equator toward the endless night. Could you imagine those winds, giant rivers of air, always streaming from day into dark, like an atmosphere forever trying to balance itself? And then, on the night side, the opposite. Cold air would sink, heavier, denser, sliding across the ground like invisible glaciers. It would race toward the heat, desperate to replace the rising air. The result? A constant, global conveyor belt of wind. Hot air flowing into night, cold air rushing into day. No pause, no season, just eternal exchange. Would you stand in those winds? Would you lean into them, feeling their endless push, like a heartbeat of the earth trying to breathe in a world without spin? Now let's imagine the borderlands, the twilight strip where day meets night. There, the winds would crash together. Hot currents, cold currents, all colliding in titanic battles above the horizon. Lightning storms might rage forever in those skies. Rain might pour for centuries, a constant deluge where the two worlds meet. Could you live beneath such a sky, where thunder never stops? Would you grow used to it, the way we grow used to rain? Or would you forever be startled by the endless roar? And what of dust? Without the graceful sweep of rotating winds, dust storms might grow vast, unending. Imagine the Sahara's sand not bound to a continent, but lifted and carried endlessly into the night side, spreading dunes where no desert had ever been. Would cities vanish beneath those sands? Would oceans darken with layers of fine, drifting dust? The strange, isn't it, to realize how much spin gives order to chaos? We rarely think of it, yet it's there in every gust, every breeze, every sigh of wind through the trees. Without spin, would the air itself feel less alive or more dangerous? And what about us, fragile creatures that we are? Could humans survive such winds? Right now, the strongest gusts we face, hurricane-force winds, can flatten buildings and uproot forests. But the winds of a still earth might dwarf even that. Continuous gales, forever flowing, with no calm days between. Would we learn to build differently, anchoring our homes deep into the ground, like roots clinging to soil? Would we tunnel underground, living like moles to escape the endless roar above? Perhaps we would invent new tools. Enormous windbreaks stretching for miles. Cities covered in domes, shimmering like glass shells against the storm. Or perhaps, instead of fighting the wind, we would harness it. Imagine colossal turbines spinning endlessly, powered not by passing breezes but by eternal rivers of air. Could we create a civilization fueled entirely by the breath of a motionless planet? And then, let's pause and ask, Would the winds ever grow still? It seems unlikely. The imbalance between light and dark would never cease. Heat would always rise, cold would always sink, and air would always flow to balance the two. Stillness would be gone forever. The soft, quiet evenings we know, the ones where a breeze brushes your cheek and then fades, might never return. Could you live without stillness? Without the peace of a calm summer night? Would the endless winds drive you restless? Or would you learn to hear their music, a lullaby written by a broken earth? Let's not forget the oceans, either. Winds push water. They drive waves, stir currents, shape tides. Without spin, ocean tides would already grow strange. But combined with endless winds, the seas would become wild. On the day side, winds would whip the oceans into boiling cauldrons. On the night side, they might drive icebergs across frozen seas. The twilight oceans, those would be storms eternal, waves as tall as mountains, crashing beneath a sky split by lightning. Would sailors dare cross such seas? Or would ships vanish forever into the churning divide? And yet, I wonder, could new beauty emerge? Imagine skies painted with endless ribbons of auroras, born from storms colliding at the edge of night. Imagine dunes sculpted by constant winds into shapes no human eye has yet seen. Curves, spirals, waves of sand as delicate as lace, stretching across continents. Imagine the whispers of wind echoing through canyons, carving them deeper, singing songs that would last for centuries. Would you pause to listen even if the storm never stopped? Now, consider the creatures of this world. Birds, for example. How would they fly in eternal winds? Would they learn to glide endlessly, carried on rivers of air like eternal migrators? Would their wings grow longer, stronger, tuned for endurance? And insects, those fragile flyers, would they vanish, or would they cling to sheltered valleys, wings no longer for flight but for balance in the constant gusts? Even plants would change. Trees might grow squat and twisted, bending always with the wind, never straight. Leaves might shrink, hardened against tearing gales. Whole forests might look like seas of bent wood, waves of green forever bowing to invisible currents. Could you walk through such a forest, where every branch groans in the same direction? And then humans again. Would we still find poetry in the wind? Right now, we write songs about breezes, about whispers through the grass. We find comfort in the sigh of autumn air. But in that new world, would we still sing of wind, or would we curse it as a relentless force, an enemy of peace? Or perhaps we might do both. Love and fear as always. It makes you realize wind is not just weather. It is memory too. The smell of rain carried on a breeze. The sound of leaves rustling at dusk. The way a gust lifts a kite into the sky. Without spin, those moments would vanish. In their place, a new world of wind would rise. Endless, mighty, unyielding. So what would happen to the winds if Earth stopped spinning? They would become eternal. They would become rivers across the globe, flowing always from day to night, from hot to cold. Storms would rage differently, without swirl but with ferocity. Life would bend or break beneath their power. And yet, in their endlessness, perhaps we would find new beauty, new energy, new meaning. Perhaps, if you listen closely on a calm night here and now, you can hear what would be lost. The quiet hush of air, the gentle whisper through leaves, the peace of stillness. Hold on to that. Treasure it. For it is born from the turning of our earth, a gift we rarely notice. And ask yourself, if the winds never rested, could I learn to love them still? Have you ever stopped to wonder what would happen to the seas themselves if Earth stopped spinning? We often think of the ocean as eternal, don't we? Vast, deep, unchanging. A blue blanket that covers most of our planet, its tides coming and going, its waves rolling endlessly to the shore. It feels so permanent, so steady. But the truth is, the oceans are restless, shaped every moment by forces we can barely see. By the pull of the moon, the warmth of the sun, and yes, by the spin of the earth beneath them. If that spin suddenly ceased, the oceans would not stay where they are now. No, they would surge, they would heave, they would rearrange themselves in ways almost impossible to picture. But let's try together slowly. Can you imagine standing at the shore, listening to the waves, and then, without warning, the rhythm breaks? The waves no longer follow their familiar beat. The sea begins to rise, not in a gentle tide, but in a massive, thundering wall of water. Would you run, or would you stand in awe, frozen, as the ocean itself seemed to leap onto the land? Why would this happen? Well, right now, Earth's spin gives the oceans a bulge at the equator. Water is pulled outward, creating a swelling band around the middle of the world. It's subtle, we don't notice it day to day, but it means the seas are actually higher at the equator than near the poles. If Earth's spin stopped, that bulge would collapse. The oceans would flow back toward the poles, flooding coastlines, draining equatorial seas. Entire continents would find their shapes transformed. Picture this. Regions near the equator might lose their oceans entirely, their seas retreating north and south. What would be left behind? Vast salt flats, gleaming white under the eternal sun. Would strange new life forms evolve there, learning to live in shimmering deserts of salt where once fish swam? And at the poles, oceans would surge and rise. Entire new seas might form, drowning lands we know today. Could you imagine Antarctica not as an icy wasteland, but as a drowning archipelago? Its ice gone, its valleys filled with roaring polar seas? Could Greenland vanish beneath waves that never retreat? But that is only the slow reshaping. In the instant the spin ceased, the ocean's inertia, their momentum, would unleash chaos. Water would not want to stop. It would surge forward at more than 1,000 kilometers per hour, like a runaway train. Can you picture an entire ocean rushing inland? Unstoppable, mountains of water tearing across continents? What city could withstand that? What tower, what wall, could survive the sheer weight of billions of tons of water moving as one? Perhaps the very crust of the earth would groan under the strain, cracking, reshaping, grooved forever by the scars of fleeing seas. Would we, as tiny beings on this surface, even understand what was happening? Or would we simply vanish beneath the floods, our histories washed away in an instant? And yet, after the chaos, a new balance would come. A world of oceans rearranged, redistributed, forever alien to our eyes. Let's imagine living in that world. Near the equator, the seas have drained. What was once the Caribbean is now a vast plain, cracked with salt and streaked with fossilized coral. Ships lie stranded in fields of dust, their hulls rusting under the eternal sun. Would people walk among them like ruins, telling stories of a time when water once lapped at their sides? Further north, Europe has changed. Perhaps the North Sea has swelled, spilling over into lowlands, drowning entire nations. Could London vanish beneath polar waters, its towers poking like stone fingers from a gray, restless sea? Would humans rebuild on cliffs and mountains, their new harbors where once only peaks stood? And Asia, imagine Asia. The Indian Ocean drained in parts, leaving behind valleys of salt and skeletons of whales, while the Arctic swells, swallowing Siberia. The balance of land and sea reshaped so drastically that maps would look like fiction. Could you recognize Earth at all in this still world? And yet, amid all this change, the sea would still be the sea. It would still move, it would still sing, it would still cradle life. But would that life survive the reshaping? Let's think of the creatures of the deep. Fish that thrive in equatorial waters would find themselves stranded, their habitats gone. Coral reefs, already fragile, would dry and crumble. Whales that migrate thousands of miles would find their routes broken, their feeding grounds vanished. Would they adapt? Would they find new seas at the poles? Or would their songs fade into silence? And then, let's consider us, humans. Could we endure a world where oceans have shifted so completely? Could we find new coasts, build new cities, learn new ways to live with seas we no longer recognize? Perhaps we would move toward the twilight strip, where winds rage and rain pours, where rivers from the sunlit side meet icy flows from the night. Could we build floating cities there, anchored between day and night, forever adrift on stormy waters? And here's a question. What of the tides themselves? Right now, the moon pulls at our oceans, creating tides that rise and fall, guiding sailors, shaping shores. But without Earth's spin, the rhythm of tides would change. They might grow harsher, stranger, pulled directly toward the moon without the moderation of rotation. Whole coastlines might flood and drain with brutal suddenness. Could you live beside a sea that vanished every few hours, then returned as a roaring flood? Or would we abandon the coasts entirely, retreating inland, leaving the oceans to themselves untamed and alien? Perhaps, in time, life would return. The oceans are resilient. They have shifted before in ages long past. Continents have moved, seas have risen and fallen, yet life has endured. Fish have found new rivers, corals have grown anew, humans have built new harbors. Could it be that even in a still world, the oceans would find balance again, their waters settling into strange but stable shapes? Let's imagine walking along one of those new shores. The air smells different, saltier, harsher. The sky above is filled with endless clouds, whipped by ceaseless winds. Waves crash endlessly, unbroken by calm days. Yet even so, there is beauty. The sea still glimmers in sunlight. The horizon still calls with mystery. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the same rhythm that has always been there. The eternal heartbeat of water, forever rising, forever falling. Would you find peace there? Could you sit by that alien ocean and still feel at home? Or would you always yearn for the gentle, familiar tides of a spinning earth? I wonder. For all our imagining, one truth remains. The oceans are alive because Earth spins. That spin shapes their currents, drives their circulation, spreads warmth across their depths. It connects polar seas to tropical waters, binds all oceans into one. Without it, they would still exist, yes, but not as the seas we know. They would be different seas, strange seas, seas of silence and storm. And yet, isn't it remarkable to realize how much of life depends on this invisible spin? How every wave you've ever seen, every tide you've ever watched, every shoreline you've ever walked has been shaped by the turning of the earth beneath your feet. Perhaps the next time you stand at the beach watching the waves roll in, you might think of it. You might feel the hidden power of a planet in motion, spinning gently, endlessly, carrying the seas along with it. And you might whisper a quiet thank you to the earth, to its spin, to the balance that makes our world a place where oceans can sing, tides can breathe, and life can flourish. So what would happen to the seas if Earth stopped spinning? They would surge. They would flood and retreat, destroy and reshape. They would carve new worlds, drown old ones, and force life to begin again. And yet, in their endlessness, they would remain. For though Earth might stop, the seas would always find a way to move, to breathe, to endure. And perhaps, just perhaps, we would too. Have you ever noticed how much we rely on the air, even though we almost never think of it? It is invisible, silent, almost weightless. Yet every breath we take is made of it. Every sigh, every laugh, every whispered word drifts through this unseen ocean. We swim in it without ever diving. We sail on it without ever noticing the waves. But what would happen to this ocean of air if Earth suddenly stopped spinning? Would it too rush forward, pulled by its momentum, like the seas we imagined in the last chapter? Would the winds themselves become walls of destruction, storms of unimaginable force? Let's sit with this question, slowly, and breathe together as we think. Take a breath in. Feel how gentle it is, how natural. Now imagine that air not moving softly into your lungs, but racing past your face at over 1,000 kilometers an hour. Could you even breathe? Or would the world itself feel like a hurricane you could never escape? Right now, Earth's spin carries the air with it. Our atmosphere clings to the planet, turning smoothly along with the ground beneath our feet. That's why, when you step outside, you don't feel the earth whipping you eastward at tremendous speed. You only feel the wind when it shifts slightly faster or slower than the ground below. But if Earth stopped, oh, the air would not stop with it. It would keep going, rushing eastward at the speed of rotation, tearing across the surface. Can you imagine that? Mountains battered by walls of air, forests flattened in an instant, cities shredded as if made of paper. The very breath of the world turned into a roaring wave of destruction. Would you even have time to wonder what was happening? Or would the sky simply descend upon you like a giant, invisible flood? But let's not only think of the terror. Let's think of the long after. Suppose the initial rush of wind swept across continents, tearing down what once was. After the chaos, the air would still move but differently. Without Earth's spin, the great currents of atmosphere that shape our climate would vanish. No more trade winds circling the tropics, no more jet streams streaking above. Instead, air would move in vast, simple patterns. From the heat of the endless day side to the cold of the eternal night. A giant conveyor belt of wind, forever rushing toward balance but never finding it. What would that feel like? Imagine living on the twilight strip, that narrow zone between blistering sun and frozen dark. The winds would howl there without ceasing, storms raging as hot air and cold air collided. Would you build your home underground, seeking shelter from a sky that never rests? Or would you learn to move with the wind, building floating towns carried by its endless flow? And what of the places beneath the eternal sun? There, the air would rise in massive, thunderous columns, heated until it soared toward the sky. Could clouds even form there? Or would the air be too parched, too dry, too scorched to hold water? Would deserts stretch endlessly, the land cracked and brittle under skies of shimmering heat? And on the dark side, the frozen side, air would sink. Cold, heavy, relentless. Would it pool there, thick and suffocating, like invisible glaciers of atmosphere pressing against the land? Or would it rush toward the light, forever cycling, forever seeking warmth? Have you ever thought of the air as alive? In this new world, it would feel alive, moving, roaring, screaming across landscapes. Not the gentle friend we know, but a restless wanderer, always chasing balance. And yet, wouldn't that be beautiful in its own way? Picture it. The sky painted with endless ribbons of storm, lightning flashing constantly at the edge of night, thunder rolling like the heartbeat of the planet, winds weaving songs that never end. Could we learn to love that strange music? Let's think of the creatures who might adapt. Birds, how would they fare? The winds would be too fierce for delicate wings. Perhaps only the strongest flyers would survive, evolving into massive gliders, wings stretched wide, riding the endless streams like albatrosses in a storm. Their cries would echo through skies that never calm, their lives spent forever in motion. And what of insects? Tiny as they are masters of survival. Could they learn to cling low, crawling instead of flying, their wings shriveled into memory? Or perhaps they would ride the winds themselves, drifting like seeds across the world, letting the air carry them to whatever edge it wished. And then humans. How would we survive a world where the air itself is in rebellion? Could we build shelters strong enough to withstand storms that never end? Could we craft machines to harness the winds, turning destruction into power? I imagine cities built underground, carved into stone, where the air outside is too fierce to bear. People would step out only in special suits, shielding themselves against the endless gale. Or perhaps humanity would move into the twilight zone, building towering walls to channel the wind, creating pockets of calm where villages could thrive. But could we ever go back to the simple joy of feeling a breeze on our face, gentle and soft? Could we ever again trust the air to be our companion, rather than our enemy? And yet, isn't there resilience in us? We have lived through ice ages and deserts, through plagues and storms, and always we have found a way. Would we not also find a way here, in this still world of roaring winds? I wonder too about sound. Have you ever noticed how wind itself sings? A gentle breeze hums through trees. A strong gust whistles across windows. In this world, where air is always moving, the sound would never stop. The planet itself would be filled with the constant roar of atmosphere. Would silence become the rarest treasure? Would people seek out hidden caves where the air grows still, just to remember what quiet feels like? And what about smell? Winds carry scents, flowers, salt, rain. In a world of endless gales, smells would never linger. They would vanish as quickly as they came, whisked away by restless currents. Would memory itself feel fragile, as fleeting as the fragrance of a flower swept into the storm? Do you notice how much of life depends on air as it is now? Not only breathing, but growing, moving, feeling. The gentle cycles of climate that give us seasons, rains, harvests. Without spin, all that would change. Agriculture would collapse. Crops that rely on steady rains would wither. Entire ecosystems would crumble. And yet, slowly, painfully, new ones would arise. Plants that grow only in fierce winds. Animals that thrive in constant storms. A new balance, alien but alive. It makes me wonder, if you were born into that world, would you find it strange? Or would you simply accept it as the way things are? The sky always restless, the air always moving, the storms always singing? Perhaps you would find our spinning earth boring, too calm, too predictable. Perspective is everything, isn't it? And so, the question lingers, what would happen to the air if Earth stopped spinning? It would roar, it would rage, it would flatten and remake the world. And then, slowly, it would settle into patterns both strange and magnificent. Winds would become rivers across the sky, storms would become the planet's heartbeat, and life would learn to dance with them. When you step outside tomorrow and feel a breeze, think of it. Think of how gentle it is, how kind. Think of the spin of Earth that keeps it balanced, keeps it soft. And whisper a thank you, perhaps, for the gift of calm air. The unseen ocean that holds us, carries us, loves us quietly. Because without it, the world would never be the same. Have you ever gazed at the night sky and felt small? Not frightened small, but beautifully, comfortingly small? The kind of smallness that reminds you the universe is vast, ancient, and filled with mysteries beyond number. Now imagine looking up at that same sky. But it never moves. No stars drifting from east to west. No familiar patterns slowly shifting with the hours. No moon rising or setting. Just a canopy of lights, fixed forever, as if painted onto the heavens. What would it mean if Earth no longer spun? We've already wondered about the oceans, the winds, the heat, the cold. But what about the sky, the daily rhythm of stars and sun and moon? Have you thought about how deeply we depend on this quiet dance above us? Picture it. One side of the world bathed forever in sunlight, the other shrouded endlessly in night. On the dark side, the constellations would never move. Orion would remain frozen, his belt forever pointing toward the horizon. The Milky Way would stretch in the same place every night, never shifting, never setting. Would you find comfort in such constancy? Or would you begin to long for change, the gentle turning of night into day, the slow parade of stars overhead? And what of the sun itself? On the bright side, the sun would hang motionless in the sky, never rising, never setting, glaring down with eternal intensity. Can you imagine that? No sunrise, no sunset, no dawn, no dusk? The very colors of our lives would vanish. No golden mornings, no pink evenings, just relentless brilliance. Would it feel like being trapped in a painting of noon? Forever? Or would you grow used to it, living your life beneath a sun that never moves, measuring time not by shadows but perhaps by seasons, or by the rhythm of your own heart? Think, too, of the moon. Right now, it drifts through our nights, waxing and waning, pulling on the tides with its gentle hand. Without Earth's spin, the moon's rising and setting would also stop. It would hover in place, locked in the sky. Can you imagine a world where the same face of the moon hangs over your head every night? Always full, always bright. Would it still feel magical, or would its mystery fade, dulled by its permanence? And yet, perhaps the stillness would create new kinds of wonder. Imagine standing on the eternal night side, where the stars blaze brighter than you have ever seen, unpolluted by the light of the sun. The constellations would not move, but you would see them in unimaginable clarity, sharp and brilliant against the black. Entire civilizations might learn to navigate not by shifting skies, but by landmarks fixed in the heavens. What myths would be born from a sky that never changes? Would gods seem eternal, painted permanently above? Or would people grow restless, yearning for movement, inventing stories of a time when the heavens danced? And on the bright side, what of the people there? They would never see the stars at all. Their skies would be endlessly blue, washed of starlight by the sun's glare. Would they even believe the dark side's tales of a star-filled sky? Would the two halves of humanity grow apart? One forever in sunlight, one forever under stars, each unable to imagine the other's world? Have you thought about how much we rely on the rhythm of day and night, not only to mark time, but to give life a gentle balance? Our bodies are tuned to it. Circadian rhythms guide our sleep, our hunger, our moods. Without the cycle of light and dark, how would we adapt? On the bright side, would people sleep at all? Or would they divide their lives into hours only by choice, using artificial dark to shield themselves from the sun? On the dark side, would people begin to glow, their bodies adapting to endless night, eyes widening like owls, skin pale and luminous under the eternal stars? Would we become two species, divided by light and dark, each shaped by its unchanging sky? And what of time itself? Have you noticed how much of our sense of time depends on motion? The turning earth gives us hours, days, weeks. The shifting sky gives us seasons. Without this rhythm, time would blur. Hours would lose meaning. A minute under eternal sun would feel no different from 1,000 minutes. Would time itself become more like a circle than a line, something experienced through memory rather than measured on a clock? Maybe you'd tell time by the growth of plants, or by the migrations of animals if they still migrated, or perhaps by the beating of your own heart, the one clock that never stops. Would you miss sunsets most of all? That fleeting magic, when the world softens, when the sky turns pink and gold and lavender, when day surrenders gently to night. That moment is a gift of Earth's spin. Without it, the poetry of dusk would be gone. And yet, perhaps you'd find new poetry, new rituals. On the night side, people might gather to watch the constellations, naming each star as a family friend, tracing them in stories that never shift. On the bright side, people might build temples that honor the unmoving sun, creating art with shadows that never drift. I wonder, if you were born into that world, would you even miss what we have? Or would you simply find your own wonder, your own rhythms, in skies that never change? There's something strangely comforting in that thought, that life, no matter how alien, would always find beauty. Even in stillness, even in endless night or endless day, wonder would bloom. Let's imagine together. Close your eyes and place yourself on the edge of twilight, where day and night meet. Look to the horizon. On one side, the sun hovers forever, casting a sky of gold that never fades. On the other side, stars glitter endlessly, a jeweled curtain that never moves. And you, standing between, can see both at once, the sun and the stars together. Wouldn't that be breathtaking? Perhaps people would gather there at the twilight edge, building cities that look both ways. Homes with one window to the sun, one to the stars. Lives balanced between brilliance and mystery. Children running between light and dark, growing up with both sky stories shaping their dreams. Could that twilight strip become the true heart of humanity, the place where both halves of the world meet? And isn't that a kind of lesson, too? That balance often lies at the edge where opposites touch. So what would happen to the sky if Earth stopped spinning? The stars would freeze. The sun would never move. The moon would hang in place. And our sense of time, of rhythm, of beauty itself would be rewritten. But would life end? No. Life would adapt. People would learn to tell new stories, to find new meaning in stillness. The sky would no longer dance, but perhaps our imaginations would dance all the more, filling the heavens with stories that move where the stars do not. So tomorrow night, when you see the stars shift overhead, when you watch the moon rise, when you see the sun set, pause for a moment. Think of the gift of motion. Think of how precious it is that our skies are alive, always changing, always turning. And whisper to yourself, thank you, Earth, for your spin, for your dance, for the beauty you weave in our skies each and every day. Because without it, the heavens would be still. And perhaps stillness would be beautiful in its own way. But oh, how lucky we are to live in a world that turns. Have you ever wondered what it means to say goodbye to a question? We've walked together, step by step, through this long thought experiment. What if Earth stopped spinning? We've pictured the oceans rushing inland, the winds screaming across continents, the skies frozen in place, and the delicate balance of life rewritten. But now, here at the end, I find myself asking, what have we truly been exploring? Was it just physics? Just the mechanics of rotation and orbit, gravity and inertia? Or was it also something deeper, a meditation on change, on balance, on the fragile, wondrous fabric of life itself? So let's linger here, one last time, in the soft twilight of curiosity. Let's hold the question in our hands as if it were a smooth stone found by a riverbank. Ordinary at first glance, but when you turn it over, it gleams with hidden colors. What would it mean, really, for the Earth to stop spinning? We've imagined the chaos, yes, the flooding seas, the endless storms, the cracking ground. But haven't we also imagined the stillness? The strange beauty of a sky that never shifts, the deep silence of a night that never ends, the blazing certainty of a sun fixed forever overhead. Would you fear such a world, or would you grow to love it? Sometimes, I think about the way children adapt to whatever world they are given. A child born under endless sunlight might find comfort in the warmth, might laugh at shadows as they never move, might draw pictures of the blazing sun with joy. A child born under eternal stars might think darkness is simply home, might whisper wishes to constellations that never change, might see beauty where others see cold. Isn't that the marvel of life? That no matter the stage, no matter the backdrop, we learn to dance upon it? And so I ask, maybe the question was never just what would happen if Earth stopped spinning. Maybe it was also, what happens to us when the familiar stops moving? When the rhythm we have always trusted suddenly vanishes? Would we despair? Or would we write new songs to the beat of a different drum? Imagine for a moment that you are standing on the twilight line, the very edge between the endless day and the endless night. One hand outstretched into golden brilliance, the other into velvet darkness. You feel both at once, the warmth of the sun, the cool kiss of starlight. Where would you choose to live? Would you walk toward the light, seeking safety and clarity? Or would you wander into the night, drawn to mystery and stars? Or perhaps you'd stay right there in the balance, savoring both at once. Couldn't that strip of twilight become a metaphor for life itself? Forever choosing, forever balancing, between extremes, between certainty and wonder, between warmth and shadow, between knowledge and mystery. And maybe that's the lesson hiding in this whole strange thought experiment. The Earth spins. We take it for granted. But it is in that spinning, in the rhythm of day and night, of seasons, of tides, that balance is born. Without it, the world becomes an extreme, a place of absolutes. Endless heat, endless cold. Life survives in the middle, at the edge where opposites meet. Do you feel that too? That life thrives not in stillness or in chaos alone, but in the delicate dance between them? Let's take a step back, higher, higher still, until we're looking not just at Earth, but at the solar system, at the galaxy. Everything turns. Everything moves. The planets spin, the stars orbit, the galaxies swirl like whirlpools of light. Motion is not just what Earth does, it is what the universe does. So then, what would it mean if Earth alone grew still? Wouldn't it be like a single note in a symphony refusing to play? The music would go on, yes, but something vital would be missing. The harmony would lose its balance. Have you noticed how we humans often long for stillness? We dream of quiet moments, of frozen hours when the world seems to stop. Yet, paradoxically, it is the movement around us that makes stillness so precious. A pause means nothing unless there is a song flowing around it. So too, perhaps, with Earth. A still Earth is not impossible to imagine, but in imagining it, we discover how deeply we need the turning, the rhythm, the endless dance of day into night. What do you think? Would you still call it Earth if it no longer spun? Or would it be something altogether different? A world with the same land and sea, but a soul changed forever? And then, another question arises. Could we, humans, survive such a change? Yes, we could build domes, machines, cities that mimic day and night. Yes, we could engineer ways to carry the rhythm within us when the world outside has lost its beat. But would we still feel at home? Or would we always, in some quiet corner of our hearts, yearn for a sunrise? Perhaps that is why this question touches us so deeply. It is not only about physics or astronomy, it is about longing, about what it means to live in a world that moves, and to imagine losing that gift. And now, as we near the close of this long journey, I wonder, have we been talking about Earth at all? Or have we been talking about ourselves? Because don't we too spin? We move through cycles of joy and sorrow, of light and dark, of energy and rest. Our lives turn, endlessly turning. Sometimes we wish it would stop, just for a while. Sometimes we wish we could freeze the happiest moments, hold them forever. But if time itself were still, would we not lose the very sweetness we wish to preserve? Isn't it in the turning that life gains its meaning? So maybe the true answer to our question is not about what happens outside us, but what happens within us. If Earth stopped spinning, we would endure. We would adapt. We would find new rhythms, new balances. But perhaps we would also learn to cherish what once was, to look back at the memory of spinning days and nights with a tenderness we never had before. And you, listening here in this quiet moment, perhaps you already feel it. A gratitude, subtle and warm, for the gentle turning of the world beneath your feet. Tomorrow morning, when you wake and see the sun rise, pause for a breath. Think of it not as ordinary, but as miraculous, a miracle delivered not by gods or magic, but by the simple, steady spin of the earth. And tomorrow night, when the stars shift across the sky, remember, they are moving because you are moving. You and me and everyone carried together on this spinning sphere, forever in motion. Doesn't that thought make you smile? Just a little? So what would happen if Earth stopped spinning? The seas would rise, the winds would roar, the skies would freeze. But more than that, the story of humanity would change. Our myths, our rhythms, our very sense of time and self would be rewritten. And yet, at the heart of it all, life would go on. Because life always finds a way to dance, even when the music changes. Perhaps that is the most comforting truth of all. And now, as we close this final chapter, I leave you with one last question. Not about the earth, not about the stars, but about yourself. What rhythm spins within you? Is it steady, like the turning earth? Is it uneven, like waves rushing to shore? Is it playful, like a child's laughter? Or gentle, like a breeze at dusk? Whatever it is, cherish it. Because you, too, are a planet in motion. You, too, carry a dance within you. And the world is brighter, more beautiful because of it. So sleep now if you wish. Let the earth spin you into dreams. And when you wake, remember this. The planet has not stopped. It is turning, always turning, and with it, so are you. And that is a wonder worth holding close.